It was 3 in the morning, that strange hour when the world feels like it's holding its breath. The streets outside were empty, the air still, and the quiet inside the house was so complete that even the faint hum of the refrigerator sounded loud. The wall clock ticked steadily in the hallway, marking each second with a sound that suddenly felt too sharp, too alive. In her room, Mia turned over in bed, her blanket tangled around her legs. For a moment she thought she had dreamed the sound that woke her. But then it came again, faint, deliberate, and coming from outside. Her eyes opened wide in the dim light. Something about the sound didn't fit the familiar rhythm of home. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't her dad getting up for a glass of water. These footsteps were slower, more careful, like whoever was making them didn't want to be heard. Mia's pulse quickened. She lay still, holding her breath, listening. The sound of the porch creaked faintly, a single slow step, then silence, then another. Her throat felt dry. The digital clock beside her bed glowed red. 3:02 a.m. She quietly pushed her blanket aside and sat up, her heart thudding softly in her chest. From her doorway, she could see a strip of hallway bathed in the pale blue light of the moon filtering through the curtains. Everything looked normal, yet everything felt wrong. The house had never felt this heavy, this tense. Then, a soft click echoed from somewhere near the front of the house, the kind of sound a doorknob makes when someone tests it gently. Mia's breath caught. Her dad was a light sleeper. If she could hear it, he definitely could too. She waited, frozen, staring toward the end of the hall. A few seconds later, the faint glow of a lamp flickered on from her dad's room. Relief and fear rushed through her at the same time. If he was awake, he'd know what to do. Still, curiosity tugged at her. She wanted to peek, just for a second, to be sure she wasn't imagining things. She tiptoed to her door, careful not to let the floorboards creak. As she leaned slightly forward, the old wooden hallway groaned under her weight, and she froze again. The footsteps outside stopped instantly. The silence that followed was so deep it almost rang in her ears. Then, after what felt like forever, a new sound came, the faint tap of something metallic brushing against the porch railing. A chill ran down her spine. Her dad's bedroom door opened quietly, and he stepped out, his expression calm but alert, his movements measured. He was barefoot, wearing a gray t-shirt and loose pants, but the way he carried himself made him look like a man who was ready for anything. He glanced down the hallway and saw Mia standing by her door, her eyes wide. He didn't speak. He just pressed a finger to his lips. The gesture was enough to make her freeze in place. His eyes were sharp, scanning the walls, the windows, the door. Years of training flickered behind that calm expression. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He had already heard what she did. From outside came another creak, this time at the back porch. Whoever was out there wasn't alone. The faint whisper of voices, too low to make out, floated through the night air. The sound was wrong, the tone fake, forced, like people pretending to sound confident when they weren't. Mia's hands shook slightly as she held onto the doorframe. The only light now came from the small lamp in her dad's room, casting long shadows across the floor. He stepped forward slowly, his bare feet silent against the wooden boards. Mia could see the focus in his eyes, that calm readiness that came from years of being trained for danger. He didn't look scared. He looked prepared. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Then, another noise, a faint metallic tap, followed by the low rustle of movement near the window. Mia's heart pounded in her chest. Her dad turned his head slightly, signaling her to move back, to stay behind him. She obeyed without a word. Outside, something shifted, a shadow against the darker night, moving past the window frame. The air felt colder suddenly, heavy with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder again, marking every second they waited, Every second the unknown stood just a few steps away from their door. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, sharp and quick, before falling silent again. Mia's dad tilted his head slightly, listening. The shadows outside shifted once more, and the floor under the porch creaked softly, closer this time. Her dad's jaw tightened. He reached for the flashlight on the hallway shelf, but didn't turn it on yet. Instead, he took one slow, steady breath, grounding himself. The moment stretched thin, fragile, like glass. Mia could feel her pulse racing in her ears. Then, faintly, a soft knock echoed through the door, polite, rhythmic, and deeply wrong for an hour like this. Whoever was outside wanted them to open up. Her dad's eyes met hers, calm and steady, and for the first time that night, she realized something. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. And whatever was about to happen next, he already knew how to face it. The hallway was dim, the soft yellow light from the small lamp spilling across the wooden floor. The air felt heavy, every sound sharper than usual. The man, a retired Navy SEAL, moved like a shadow, quiet, controlled, and focused. His steps made no noise, his breathing steady and calm. Nothing about him showed fear. His face was composed, his eyes alert. Years of training had shaped him to see danger not as panic, but as a puzzle, something to be read and understood before it struck. He didn't rush. He watched. From his bedroom doorway, he scanned the narrow hallway and then turned his attention to his daughter. Mia stood frozen at her door, her face pale in the dim light. The faint tremble in her hands told him she was scared, but she didn't move. He met her eyes and pressed a finger to his lips, the silent signal they both understood instantly. It wasn't just a gesture to stay quiet. It was a command to trust him completely. She swallowed hard and nodded slightly, not daring to make a sound. The air between them seemed to hold its breath. He moved closer to the window that faced the front porch, crouching low as he peeked through the curtain. Outside, the night looked still at first glance, but something was wrong. He could see faint glimmers of light, not the blue and red flashes of police cars, but softer, flickering beams that moved too carefully, too deliberately. They came from flashlights being used by people who didn't want to be noticed. He narrowed his eyes. There were 3 of them, standing near the edge of the porch. Their outlines were faint, shifting with the shadows. They were dressed in dark clothing, and even from inside, he could tell they were whispering to each other. Their movements were organized but nervous, the kind of coordination that didn't come from professionalism but from practice. He studied them for a few seconds longer, picking up details that others might miss, the way one man kept looking over his shoulder, the way another held something metallic near his side. Not a gun, but something like a crowbar or tool. The man's instincts sharpened. These weren't random visitors. They weren't neighbors, and they definitely weren't police. He felt the slow burn of adrenaline begin to rise, but he didn't let it control him. His mind was clear, steady. He pulled the curtain back just enough to get a wider view. One of the figures pointed toward the side of the house while the other 2 stayed near the front. They were trying to be quiet, but he could hear faint shuffling through the walls, the sound of boots on wooden planks. He turned his head slightly toward Mia, who was watching him with wide eyes. He gave her a small, deliberate hand signal, the same one he used years ago during training exercises. It meant, stay back, don't move, don't speak. She understood immediately and backed away into the shadows of her room, her hands gripping the edge of the doorframe. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. She wanted to whisper, to ask what was happening, but the seriousness in her dad's expression told her everything she needed to know. Something was out there, and it wasn't safe. He straightened slowly, keeping his body close to the wall. The years had passed since his time in the field, but his instincts hadn't dulled. Every movement outside told him a story, how they stood, how they shifted their weight, how they hesitated before the next step. They weren't here by accident. The faint glint of light reflected off something metal in one of their hands. He caught a clearer glimpse when lightning flickered in the distance, revealing their faces for half a second, covered with cheap masks, the kind you'd find at a hardware store. Not professionals, but determined. The faint whisper of their voices carried through the cracks in the door, but the words were unclear. One of them chuckled softly, and the sound made Mia flinch. Her father's expression didn't change. He stayed still, thinking, measuring every possible outcome. The front door creaked slightly as one of the men pressed his hand against it, testing it. Her dad's eyes flicked toward the lock, then to the back hallway. He memorized every sound, every second of silence. Then, he took a deep breath, slow and deliberate. He reached for the small drawer by the entrance and opened it carefully, retrieving a flashlight and his old radio, both things he always kept close, out of habit. The faint static from the radio was the only noise that broke the quiet. He turned the volume down low, just enough to hear the hum. Another flash of lightning lit up the window for an instant, and this time Mia saw the three dark shapes clearly, standing too close, whispering in hushed tones, their faces hidden by masks. She covered her mouth to keep from gasping. Her dad glanced back at her, calm but firm, and whispered only one word, "Stay." It was enough. He stepped forward, closer to the front of the house, his movements precise. Outside, the figures shifted again, one of them raising a hand to signal the others. They thought the house was sleeping, that no one inside knew they were there. But the man inside was already watching, already waiting, every nerve awake. And in that quiet moment, before the storm truly began, Mia realized her father wasn't afraid of the darkness outside. The darkness should have been afraid of him. The house stood still, the air thick with tension, when the first knock came. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't gentle either. A slow, steady rhythm that echoed down the hallway, like a heartbeat in the dark. It was the kind of knock that didn't ask for permission, but expected a response. The sound made Mia's skin prickle. Her dad froze mid-step, his hand hovering near the edge of the curtain. He didn't speak, didn't move, just listened. The knock came again, the same measured pattern, as if whoever was outside had all the time in the world. Then came a man's voice, calm but unnatural, trying too hard to sound official. "Open up, HOA inspection." The words cut through the silence like a blade, but they didn't make sense. Mia's brow furrowed. There was no homeowners association in their area. Their neighborhood was old, quiet, and far from the kind that held midnight inspections. The voice didn't match the setting. It was too practiced, too confident, a tone that belonged to someone used to being obeyed, not someone who knocked at random houses. Her dad's eyes narrowed. He didn't look confused. He looked focused, his mind already piecing things together. Years of reading people's tone and movement told him that whoever was outside wasn't there for an inspection. He slowly crouched near the front door, careful not to make the floor creak. Mia stood frozen halfway down the hallway, her body pressed against the wall. Her hands were cold, her breath shallow. She wanted to call out to her dad, to ask what they should do, but the intensity in his eyes kept her silent. He lifted one hand, toward her, palm out, a silent command, to stay where she was. She obeyed instantly. The man outside knocked again, harder this time, the thud echoing through the quiet house. "Sir, open the door. HOA business, won't take long," he said, his tone growing more impatient. The words sounded rehearsed, like lines read from a bad script. Her dad leaned slightly toward the peephole, but didn't put his face too close. Through the glass, he could make out three silhouettes, standing on the porch. Their shapes were stiff, their movements too controlled. One man stood directly in front of the door, while the others stood a little farther back, their heads turning slowly, as if scanning the property. They weren't behaving like neighbors or officials. They were acting like people who didn't belong there. He noticed something else, None of them wore reflective badges or uniforms. Their dark jackets absorbed the porch light, and one of them carried something long in his hand, hidden behind his leg. A tool, maybe, but not one for inspections. He stayed crouched, watching. His breathing was slow, quiet, every sense alert. The air outside had gone still again, the night waiting. Then came another knock, louder and sharper this time, as if meant to break his patience. "We can see the lights are on," the voice said, trying to sound casual, but slipping slightly, irritation creeping in. "Don't make us call someone." The man inside didn't answer. He kept listening, memorizing every detail, the rhythm of the knocks, the distance of the footsteps, the shift in tone. They wanted him to open the door. They needed him to. Mia, still frozen in the hallway, could hear her own pulse pounding in her ears. The sound of her heartbeat seemed louder than anything else. She clutched the edge of the wall and tried to stay still, but her knees felt weak. Every time the man outside spoke, she could hear the fake authority in his voice. It was polite, but only on the surface. Underneath, it carried something darker, something forceful. Another voice joined in, lower and rougher. "Sir, this is your last warning." Then silence. The kind of silence that hums with danger. Her dad slowly straightened and moved to the side window, peeking through a narrow gap in the curtain. The faint glow from the streetlight illuminated the men's faces, just enough for him to see what he needed. They weren't police, weren't officials. Their expressions were impatient, their stances nervous. One of them kept glancing toward a parked car at the edge of the driveway. He could see its headlights dimmed, its engine off, but the outline of another figure sitting inside. His jaw tightened. They were coordinated, waiting for something. He turned back to Mia, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stay where you are. Don't move, no matter what you hear." She nodded, her eyes wide with fear and trust. Another knock hit the door, this time strong enough to rattle the frame. It made her flinch. "Sir," the voice barked now, all pretense gone. "We know you're in there." Her dad stepped closer to the door, staying just out of sight from the windows. He could hear their footsteps shifting, the soft murmur of them whispering to each other. He looked around the room, scanning for exits, for angles, for anything that might give them an advantage. The front door handle moved slightly. Someone outside was testing it. Mia gasped softly, covering her mouth. Her dad's gaze snapped to the door, calm but ready. He didn't move toward it. Instead, he listened again, his instincts sharp as ever. The knocks had stopped, but the real storm had just begun, and as the night held its breath once more, the sound of the ticking clock filled the silence steady, patient, waiting to mark the next move in a game that was far from over. The house had fallen into a tense silence again, broken only by the faint creak of wood beneath careful footsteps. The man moved through the dim living room with the same precision he had learned years ago in places far more dangerous than this quiet neighborhood. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and silent. His breathing remained steady as he checked the locks on the front and back doors. Feeling the cold metal under his fingertips, he tested each latch without making a sound, tightening one that felt loose. He didn't need to speak. His calm presence was enough to fill the space. The soft hum of a storm outside and the occasional rustle of tree branches against the window made the silence feel heavier, as though the night itself was watching. Mia stood by the hallway entrance, her small flashlight trembling slightly in her hands, her heart racing with every sound. Her dad opened a drawer beside the couch and took out two items he always kept ready, a small, heavy flashlight and his old communication radio, the one he never threw away, even after retiring. The radio's smooth metal surface gleamed faintly in the weak light, the green power indicator still glowing. He had always said, "You never know when you'll need to stay in touch," and tonight those words felt more real than ever. He checked the battery with one quick motion and set it to the lowest volume. The faint static hum filled the silence like a heartbeat. Then, he turned toward Mia and crouched beside her. His eyes, calm and focused, met hers. He handed her the flashlight and whispered in a firm but gentle tone, "Stay low, stay quiet, don't move unless I say." His voice carried no panic, only quiet certainty, the kind of command that didn't invite questions. She nodded quickly, clutching the flashlight as if it were the only thing anchoring her to safety. He gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then stood up and moved toward the window again, his silhouette cutting a sharp outline against the pale glow outside. Mia followed his movements with her eyes, her breath shallow. The house seemed smaller now, the shadows longer, the sound of the clock louder. She could see how calm her father was, how every step he took had a purpose. It reminded her of how he used to tell stories about his time in the Navy, how preparation wasn't about fear, but about control. Outside, the faint whisper of voices came again, closer now, and the crunch of gravel under boots reached her ears. Her father paused by the side window, peeking through a thin gap in the curtain. He could see faint lights moving again, flashlights sweeping the yard, cutting through the darkness. The men were circling, waiting for an opportunity. He turned the radio dial down until it was silent and took another long, slow breath. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. Mia crouched low behind the couch, as he'd told her, her small frame hidden in the shadows. Her hands trembled, but she stayed still, trusting him completely. Her dad glanced toward her once more, giving a small nod before moving toward the back door. His eyes moved across every corner, every shadow, calculating silently. The night outside seemed endless, but inside the house, everything had narrowed down to one purpose: protection. And as the faint glow from the flashlight painted shapes across the walls, Mia realized that every quiet move her father made was not just to defend the house, but to protect her from ever feeling the fear he had already faced 1,000 times before. The sudden sound of metal scraping against wood shattered the tense silence of the house. Mia froze, her breath catching in her throat as the back door rattled violently. Someone was trying to force it open. The sound wasn't a soft tap or a quiet attempt. It was deliberate, steady, and full of intent. Every vibration of the doorknob echoed through her chest like a pulse of fear. Her father's head snapped toward the sound instantly, his instincts taking over before his mind even had to think. His sharp eyes locked onto the source of the noise, his body tense but controlled, every muscle ready. He didn't rush, he observed. The sound came again, the door shaking, the faint click of metal tools against the lock. Whoever was out there knew what they were doing. Mia pressed her hand to her mouth, her heart beat so loud she thought it might give them away. Her dad moved toward the kitchen, staying low, his bare feet silent against the cold floor. He motioned for her to stay where she was. She nodded, though her legs felt weak and unsteady. The shadows of the room seemed to stretch and twist, the ticking of the wall clock suddenly deafening in the stillness. Another rattle came from the back door, louder this time, followed by the muffled whisper of voices just outside. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone made her skin crawl, confident, cruel, and sure they'd go unnoticed. Her dad's hand brushed against the counter as he reached for something, his movements smooth and practiced. He didn't grab a weapon. He didn't need to. Instead, he unlocked the small side window near the laundry room, the one that led into the backyard, and pushed it open just enough to slip through. He turned back once, catching Mia's eyes. Even in the dim light, his calmness steadied her. It wasn't the calm of someone unaware of danger. It was the calm of someone who had faced it before and learned how to listen to it. He pressed a finger to his lips again, signaling her to stay quiet, then disappeared into the darkness outside without a single sound. The cold night air swept briefly into the house, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and the faint hum of the storm still lingering over the desert. Mia stayed by the stairs, her fingers gripping her phone tightly. The silence that followed was unbearable. Every sound, the creak of wood, The whisper of wind against the windows made her heart race. She crouched low, just as her dad had told her, keeping her eyes on the back door. The doorknob twisted once more, then stopped. A long pause. Then, a soft thud, as if one of the men had leaned against the door to listen. She wanted to move, to hide, to do anything other than sit there in the dark, but she forced herself to stay still. Her dad had said not to move unless he told her to, and she trusted him more than anyone in the world. The quiet stretched, thick and heavy. Then, a sudden crash came from outside, not from the door, but farther away, near the side of the house. It was sharp enough to make the intruders react. She heard one of them whisper something urgently, the sound of boots shifting in the gravel. Another voice hissed, "Go check." The back door went silent. A few seconds later, the faint sound of footsteps moved away from the door, heading toward the side yard. Mia's heart leaped as realization hit her. It was a distraction. Her dad had made that noise on purpose. He was leading them away. The seconds crawled by as she listened, barely daring to breathe. Somewhere outside, a shadow moved past the kitchen window, quick, silent, and confident. It was her father. She could feel the tension in every muscle of her body, her fingers tightening around her phone. The glow of the screen reflected faintly on her face, but she didn't unlock it. Not yet. She just kept listening. The wind picked up again, brushing against the windows like whispering hands. The men outside were talking in hurried tones now, their confidence cracking. One of them cursed under his breath. Another flashlight beam cut across the window, then vanished. She could only imagine what her dad was doing out there, moving in the dark, using every bit of his training to outthink them. He had always said that fear was just information, that if you stayed calm enough to read it, you could survive anything. Now, as she crouched in the dark, she understood what he meant. Minutes passed like hours. Then, the back door handle moved again, softer this time. But before she could even react, a low voice whispered from outside, firm and steady, "Don't." It was her dad's voice. The noise stopped immediately. The men outside didn't know it yet, but the situation had changed. The house no longer belonged to them, not even for a second. Mia exhaled slowly, the tension easing just enough for her to breathe again. Her father's shadow disappeared once more into the dark, and though she couldn't see him, she knew he was out there, protecting them, turning fear into focus, danger into strategy. The night was far from over, but for the first time, Mia felt something stronger than fear, faith. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint rustle of footsteps on gravel outside the house. The soft beam of a flashlight slid slowly across the curtains, cutting through the thin fabric like a blade of light. One of the men had come closer to the window, careful and slow, thinking the darkness was his shield. His boots barely made a sound as he crouched, his breath fogging the glass slightly. He moved the flashlight closer, trying to peek inside, his fingers brushing against the cold window pane. The inside of the house looked still, no movement, no light, just the faint outline of furniture and shadows. He grinned slightly, thinking no one was there, that the silence meant victory. But he didn't notice what the glass reflected, a tall, still figure standing just a few feet behind him, hidden by the edge of the house. Mia's dad was there, watching him calm as the night itself. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable, his presence almost blending into the shadows. Years of training had taught him how to move quietly, how to wait, how to let the other person make the first mistake. And this man had just made his. Inside the house, Mia crouched behind the stairs, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, her heartbeat thudding in her chest like a drum. She could see the faint light moving across the curtains, and every second felt longer than the last. She didn't know her dad was already behind them, silent and ready. The man outside whispered something, signaling to the others. Another shadow shifted near the porch, and a third figure stayed farther back, scanning the street nervously. none of them saw the reflection in the window, the shape standing in the dark with the calm patience of someone who had been in far worse situations. The man by the window leaned closer, his hand reaching for the handle. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, a low, steady voice cut through the quiet. "That's far enough." It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, deep, controlled, and commanding. The man froze instantly, his hand stopping midair. His body stiffened as if the words themselves had turned him to stone. The flashlight slipped slightly from his grip, its beam shaking. He turned his head slowly, his eyes wide, trying to locate the voice. Behind him, the darkness seemed to move. Out of the shadows stepped Mia's father, his presence firm but calm. He didn't shout or threaten. He didn't need to. His tone alone carried authority, the kind that made people stop before they even thought of resisting. The other two men turned sharply, startled by the sudden sound. For a moment, no one moved. The air between them was thick, every second drawn out. The man by the window swallowed hard, his flashlight trembling as he took an uncertain step back. He couldn't see the man's face clearly, only the outline of his shoulders, strong, still, confident. There was something in the way he stood that told them they had made a mistake. They weren't dealing with a frightened homeowner. They were dealing with someone who had faced danger before and walked through it unbroken. Mia could feel the tension even from inside. She didn't know what was happening outside, but the tone in her father's voice made her heart steady. The flashlight beam wavered, and for the first time that night, the intruders realized they weren't the hunters. They were the ones being watched. The night had reached its breaking point. For a long moment, everything outside the house stayed perfectly still. The men stood frozen, unsure whether to run or face the calm figure watching them from the shadows. The only sound was the low hum of the wind moving through the dry grass. Mia held her breath inside, her fingers gripping her phone tightly, her heart pounding as she peeked toward the window. She could still see the faint glow of the flashlight outside, and though she couldn't see her father clearly, she could feel his presence, steady and unshaken. Then, in the distance, the faint echo of sirens began to rise, soft at first, then growing louder, clearer, cutting through the silence like a warning. The men outside noticed it too. One of them cursed under his breath, spinning around toward the street. Headlights appeared at the end of the road, flashing briefly as a car turned into the driveway. Another beam of light followed, this one stronger, brighter, washing over the yard and catching the startled faces of the intruders. It was the real police. The sudden burst of light illuminated everything, the dark clothes, the cheap masks now pulled down, the confusion on their faces. Mia's father didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stood there, his eyes fixed on them, waiting to see what they would do next. The men exchanged nervous glances. One of them muttered something in panic, and another took a hesitant step backward. "Go," one whispered sharply, his voice trembling. They turned to run, but it was already too late. The sound of car doors slamming shut echoed through the yard, followed by firm voices shouting commands. "Police, don't move." The flashlights from the officers' hands cut through the night, blinding the intruders where they stood. Two of the men tried to dart toward the side of the house, but their boots slipped in the wet dirt. Within seconds, they were surrounded beams of light, locking onto their backs, the sharp sound of radios crackling through the air. From inside, Mia watched the scene unfold, her knees weak with relief. She had done it. Earlier, when she saw the men circling the yard, she had texted their neighbor, Mr. Howard, who lived across the street. She had typed only 3 words: "Call the police." He hadn't asked questions. He knew her father, knew he wouldn't reach out unless something serious was happening. That quick message had made all the difference. Now, through the window, she could see her dad stepping back slowly, letting the officers take control. One of the policemen called out to him, "Sir, are you okay?" He nodded once, his face calm but firm. The officers moved in, handcuffing the men one by one, their flashlights scanning the ground for any evidence. The intruders didn't fight. The confidence they had carried earlier was gone, replaced by fear and disbelief. They looked like men who couldn't quite understand how everything had turned so quickly against them. The night that had promised them an easy break-in had turned into a trap they'd walked into blindly. Mia opened the door just a little and saw her father walking back toward the porch. The police lights flickered red and blue across his face, painting sharp lines of color across his calm expression. He looked up at her and gave a small nod, the kind of nod that said everything was over now, that she was safe. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. He rested a hand on her shoulder, the kind of gesture that held quiet strength. Outside, one of the officers called out, "You should see this," and pointed toward the back of the truck parked near the end of the driveway. The rear doors were slightly open. Inside were folded uniforms, fake badges, and plastic ID cards, all with fake names and fake agencies printed on them. "They've been doing this for weeks," another officer said, "pretending to be officials, targeting quiet homes late at night." The words made Mia's stomach twist. The idea that those men had come to their house, pretending to be people of authority, sent chills down her spine. The lead officer turned toward her father. "You did the right thing by staying calm," he said. "If you'd opened that door, who knows what would have happened." Her father didn't say much. He just gave a small nod. He had been calm the entire time, but now that it was over, the weight of it all showed in his eyes. The officers led the handcuffed men to the police cars, their footsteps echoing on the gravel. The flashing lights reflected off the wet pavement, turning the scene into a blur of color and motion. Mia stood beside her father, watching silently as the cars pulled away, taking the intruders with them. The wind had quieted, and for the first time that night, the house felt safe again. The fear was fading, replaced by the heavy calm that follows chaos. She looked up at her father, his face steady but thoughtful, and realized something she had always known deep down. He didn't just protect their home with strength. He protected it with wisdom, patience, and courage. And as the last set of headlights disappeared down the road, Mia understood that this night would stay with her forever, not as a story of fear, but as one of bravery and trust. By the time the first rays of morning light touched the sky, the long night of fear had finally ended. The flashing police lights were gone, the neighbors had returned to their homes, and the quiet that settled over the small house felt different now, heavier, but also peaceful. The tension that had filled every corner only hours ago had faded into a calm silence. Mia sat beside her dad on the old wooden porch, the same place where she used to sit as a little girl, listening to his stories about the ocean, about training, about discipline. But this morning, there were no stories, only the soft sound of birds beginning to sing and the distant hum of cars waking up in town. The horizon was painted in shades of orange and gold, the kind of sunrise that promised a fresh start after a storm. Mia looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. She hadn't slept, but she didn't feel tired. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving only quiet gratitude that they were safe, that her dad had known exactly what to do, and that the night had ended without anyone getting hurt. She turned her head to look at him. He sat still, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the fading shadows of the yard. His face looked calm, but the lines near his eyes told her he was thinking deeply. "You weren't scared?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. Her dad glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. His voice was low, steady. "Of course I was." The answer surprised her. She blinked, not expecting him to admit it so easily. He looked back at the rising sun. "Fear's not your enemy," he continued quietly. "It's what keeps you alert. It's what reminds you to stay calm and think." His words sank into her like a lesson written directly onto her heart. He spoke slowly, not as someone trying to teach, but as someone remembering something learned the hard way. Out there, he said, gesturing faintly toward the world beyond their fence. Fear kept me alive more than strength ever did. It teaches you to respect danger, not ignore it. Mia listened carefully, the calm rhythm of his words washing over her. She had always seen her dad as fearless, the kind of man who didn't flinch, who faced everything with quiet confidence. But now she realized that his strength didn't come from the absence of fear. It came from understanding it. He turned his head toward her and smiled, his eyes soft. Being brave doesn't mean you don't feel afraid. It means you don't let fear make your choices. She nodded slowly, her throat tight. She thought about the night before, how he had moved through the dark with steady precision, how he had faced 3 men without losing control, how his voice had stayed calm even when danger was right outside their door. He hadn't acted out of anger or pride. He had acted out of something deeper, something she finally understood now. The morning sun climbed higher, lighting their small porch and warming the cool air. The quiet between them was no longer filled with tension, but with peace. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a small gesture of comfort that said more than words ever could. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, watching the sun turn the sky gold. Mia's mind replayed every moment of the night, the knocks, the voices, the fear, and how her dad had handled it all. She realized she had seen something far more powerful than the stories he used to tell. He had always spoken about discipline, patience, and control. But last night, she had seen what those words truly meant. Strength wasn't about fighting. It wasn't about proving something or showing power. It was about staying steady when everything around you tried to make you panic. It was about knowing when to move and when to wait. It was about protecting, not attacking. As the sunlight grew brighter, the world outside came alive again. Birds on the fence, a car passing on the street, the smell of morning air replacing the cold scent of fear. Mia looked at her dad again, her eyes full of quiet admiration. "You're amazing," she whispered. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No," he said simply, "just prepared." But to her, it was more than that. He wasn't just prepared, he was wise, strong, and kind. As the light spread across their small home, Mia felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. She finally understood something her dad had been teaching her all along. True courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the calm voice that says, "Stay quiet," in the middle of chaos. Sometimes it's the steady heart that protects rather than attacks. And as the last traces of night disappeared into the bright morning sky, Mia realized that the greatest strength in the world didn't come from what you fought against. It came from what and who you chose to protect.